words of these great writers. So can I welcome Martin Trivasse to the... So, Martin, are you local? Or?
I'm local. I've lived in Tamworth since 1984.
So, and I kind of guessed from your name that there's a Cornish connection somewhere.
It's well spotted, yeah.
So,
we're not directly from Cornwall. The name definitely is. Yes.
So excellent. So, and you write. What sort of things do you write?
Well, I said to you earlier on, I'm not a writer.
You are a writer.
Thank you very much. I write it very, very occasionally.
So what sort of things do you write on? I guess we're going to find out. But
well, more poetry than stories.
Okay. So, and who are your major influences?
I don't particularly have influences, but what troubles me is whenever I put pen to paper, I keep remembering there are great writers out there. I will never get anywhere near their quality, and it kind of stops me writing. So I have to forget that.
You're a writer. We're all great writers. We write what we want. I won't have anybody say they're not great writers. Sometimes we have to hone our work and do, but we've all got our stories to tell, and it's all about telling those stories. So
okay.
I'll hand you over to Martin.
All right. Cheers. Thank you. Okay. This story is based on several years of working, well, not working, but volunteering with the Samaritans in the local branch. But I want to say that to reassure you that it's entirely made up. I'm not breaking any confidence by using the Samaritans' experience for this story. It's completely invented. Okay. It's called The Volunteer. She drew a circle around the number -3 in the duty logbook. Abusing the service. Abusing himself, more like, she thought. Grace penned the letters T-O-R into the details of call box, recalling how long it had taken her to figure out what they stood for. Terminate on recognition. Samaritans seemed to love its acronyms as much as any other institution. Grace valued the fulsomeness of words and the pregnancy of phrases heavy with import. Grace's duty partner, Colin, was conscientiously emailing his little socks off. Didn't the boy have any other communication skills? Colin never chatted, never shared a coffee. Beside his keyboard lay the caller care plan folder, listing suspicious callers. Colin said that the folder was vital reading for the protection of both callers and volunteers. Colin said that the success of their role depended upon attention to detail. Thank you, Colin. In 40 minutes, Grace would be trotting briskly through Lincoln Road to meet Marlene for a pot of tea and a slice of Dundee. So, if the phone rang now, it did. Samaritans, can I help you? Nothing. Then the rasp of a phone changing hands. Oh, I'm not too sure about this. A woman, well spoken. Take your time. I don't know where to... I mean, it's so complicated. Grace could judge to perfection the length of pause which would tell a caller that silence was fine, but they wouldn't be left to wallow in embarrassment either. Well, it's my brother, really. He's done ever so well in financial consultancy, and now he's pushing me to split up the farm. Sorry, that's not very clear, is it? The caller faltered. Grace waited, then quietly said, "You're doing fine. There's no hurry." Oh dear. Grace listened to this tired woman, distressed by her own distress. You mentioned the farm. Oh, yes. Well, I don't farm. I just live in the house and on the 4 fields Father left me. I don't know why George wants to sell them separately. I suppose it's financially advantageous. But it's the family home, you see. And out it all came. In a gorgeous voice, too, thought Grace. Refined. George wants me to make a decision, but I'm really not ready. I'm meant to be hosting a family conference next week, and I'm terrified. I just can't think what to do. Grace eyed Colin at the computer and dropped her voice a little. Well, dear, We don't give advice, we just listen. Yes, I understand. It's just... A pause. Yes? I mean, I love George, but he just doesn't feel about things the way I do. A longer pause. Was she tiring? Time to give her a little holiday, thought Grace. Still, it must be very rewarding to live in the country. Oh, yes. A perkier tone now. Grace briefly warmed her hands by the hearth of good judgment. It has its advantages. I work from home and it suits what I do. Which is? I'm an arts columnist, mostly for the broadsheets. Grace sat forward a fraction. How lovely. So satisfying to do something influential. Oh, hardly influential. I spout half-baked opinions which I've only just dreamt up and rarely believe. It's pretty much a reflection of how I live, how I deal with life. Sorry, I mean, I can't be honest. I heartily dislike that aspect of myself. Grace sighed appreciatively. Heartily dislike. Lovely. I'm weak. I know I am. George wants a decision, and he can be so... Grace held her breath. So irrevocable. Beautiful, thought Grace. The next pause was filled with tears, this time the calmer crying of a woman who simply needed to cry. To her momentary surprise, Grace's eyes moistened too. I want to thank you. I've never... Then a deep breath, in through the nose, as if the woman had come to a decision. My name is Catherine. I know it sounds pompous, but I prefer Catherine to Cathy or Kate. And I know why I'm crying. I'm crying because I so rarely have the opportunity to tell the truth. My entire life is hedged around with deceit and distraction. Whoever you are, thank you. Happiness rumbled through Grace's frame as the moment hung. This cultured voice distilled civility in an uncivil world, gangrenous with its own dumb inarticulacy. Hello? Grace almost panicked, wondering how long she'd been entranced. She must not lose Catherine. I'm so sorry. I am listening. This has meant so much to me, and I'd call again, but I suppose I'd be speaking to someone else. Grace felt a warm urgency flood through her. I'm afraid that's right. Not that it would matter. We're all fully trained. Grace overlooked the flicker of guilt. She knew that her words allowed the possibility that other volunteers might not be as good as her. It's more than training, though, isn't it? I mean, sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to use your name. Oh, I think I can trust you with that. It's Grace. Oh, what a lovely name. Look, Grace, I realise I'm being soppy, but trained or not, you're just what I need. It's such a relief just to say it all, to be honest, to be heard. That's it, yes, to be heard. Now her crying was the breaching of a dam, the purging of the Stygian stables, the letting of blood. Grace cried too. Colin swiveled away from his computer and watched Grace with a mixture of worry and awe. Colin wrote a note in capital letters asking Grace if she wanted him to listen in on the call. She flung a hand towards Colin in a gesture of irritable dismissal. He impassively stepped away. The call continued for another quarter of an hour. Colin paid discreet attention to Grace's share of the conversation, occasionally turning from his emails to see how she was doing. Sorry, Catherine, say the name again? I can't say I've heard of it. What's it near? Well, I suppose it's a little unusual these days, but then I didn't learn to drive until I was in my 40s. That's very sweet of you, dear, but I think I could now be described as a woman of a certain age. In the final quiet moments of his duty, Colin wandered into Grace's phone booth. Several crumpled tissues lined the little wire waste bin. Her turtle-shell fountain pen lay beside her notepad. He looked at the pad and made tiny puffing noises through his chubby lips, like a distant river steamer. Colin picked a pencil out of one pocket and a penknife from another. Steadily, he shaved the tip of his pencil onto the notepad. After a minute or so, he held the notepad to his lips, blew gently, and squinted at the top sheet. Catherine's home perched atop a distinctive crest of limestone, and now Grace smiled into the uncertain face of a slim, fine-featured woman, her grey hair gathered in a ponytail. "Hello?" There it was. That glorious voice that made Grace think of radio valves, pianos, and history. "Catherine?" Yes?" "I'm Grace. We spoke on the telephone yesterday. I wanted to see how you were." Grace's voice shook a little. Would Catherine guess that Grace was offending almost every Samaritan's rule and the spirit of the rules? What would she... "Grace!" Catherine's eyes widened, as if to make room for the tears that welled up there. Her naming of Grace was a reverential whisper. She leaned towards Grace, whose arms lifted in involuntary response. Their embrace was long, tearful, and intense. Grace felt Catherine's fingers sink a little into her back. The day became evening with the gentle insistency of an April breeze. They inspired each other, illuminated each other. They were soft clay in each other's hands, marvelling at their new shapes. To Grace, her surroundings were a musical score to this perfect film. Lead crystal wine glasses toyed with the firelight that spilled from a brass grate in the lounge. The burnished black oak of a folded cake stand gleamed beside their couch. When Catherine retrieved keepsakes from her writing bureau, the neat drawers slid out on green felt linings. She played a recording of Thomas Tallis's O Sacrum Convivium. The room and the music and Catherine drew Grace into their arms and welcomed her home. The kiss, when it came, was easy. Grace briefly wondered if she should think this through, then decided not to. She noted that she had thought this through many times in the past. The pathway had been cut and trodden, and all she had to do was step onto it and walk home. "Grace." Catherine raised her up, and with steady fingers unbuttoned Grace's blouse, unzipped her skirt, eased her slip down, and unclipped her bra. A delicate billow of warmth from the fire stroked her bare skin. "I want to look at you," said Catherine. She stepped back towards the mirror, and Grace saw herself in its polished frame. She smiled and braced her shoulders, lifting her large breasts a little and raising her chin. She turned to Catherine and smiled more broadly. "And I want to look at you too," she said. "Piss off!" Something flashed white, and bright lights snapped on throughout the room. A man was standing beneath the plaster arch that led to the conservatory. A man was standing, and he was laughing. A man was laughing. A man was standing. Someone had told her to piss off. Not the man. Catherine had told her. Catherine was laughing and jigging up and down. Lost in a blizzard of unknowing, Grace switched her stare to her reflection in the mirror. She saw herself, and something flashed again. Someone was laughing. They were probably laughing at the enormous knickers, the tired flesh, the big floppy breasts. They were probably laughing at the funny woman in her knickers with her mouth open. Catherine skipped over to the man and leant upon his shoulder. "What do you reckon, my darling?" "One of your best, Kate. Undoubtedly one of your best." "But where are my manners?" continued Catherine. Grace, sweetheart, allow me to introduce my darling brother George. Tell you what, brother mine, you do the explaining and I'll take a few more pics. George dropped flamboyantly onto the couch as the camera flashed again. Grace felt as if the flash actually hurt her exposed breasts. She covered her chest with arms that felt no less exposed. Explaining? She whispered. Jolly good, said George. It's like this, my sad old flabby-titted do-gooder. We collect hypocrites. It's our pleasure, nay, our duty, to search out the two-faced, the quacks and the weasels and make 'em dance to our tune. Grace, Grace, how we played you, how you hung on our line and wriggled. God hath given you one face and you make yourselves another. Catherine strolled in between George and Grace. Give her the list, darling. Let her know she's in good company. Grace was beginning to make vague movements in the direction of where she believed her clothing might be. But of course, George cried. We've had vicars, detective inspectors, head teachers, mayors, reporters. George stood up and ripped off a salute. And we fucked 'em all. Catherine giggled and turned to Grace. Do you know you're as ugly as sin, inside and out? You get off listening to the pig swill of our nation bearing their sorry little souls to you. That's not a phone you're holding, darling. It's the dildo of the dilettante, the vibrator of the voyeur. There was another flash. Catherine looked at the camera in her hand, then at George. That wasn't me. In the doorway of the lounge stood Colin. From his left hand dangled a camera. In his right hand he held the crook lock from his car. His podgy frame shook and a tang of sweat arose from him. I'm going to take you home, he said. George stepped towards him and Colin swung the heavy bar at his head. George's hands flew up and he screamed as two of his fingers were broken. Shaking wildly, Colin grabbed Grace's clothes and waved them at her. As she pulled them roughly into position, Colin slung her handbag onto his heavy shoulder and tugged Grace towards the door. He turned to Catherine. I can come back, you know. I've got nothing to lose. As Grace crossed the parquet floor to the front door, she flinched at an astonishing cacophony of breaking glass behind her. Colin caught her up and said, their glasses cabinet or something. Colin drove Grace's car with clumsy urgency. They journeyed in thickening silence for 10 minutes, until Grace seemed to choke off a scream and cried, Stop, Colin! Stop right here! Grace sat in the stillness, in the soft autumn twilight of the moorlands. She didn't know much now, except that Colin must say something. Her life was in Colin's hands. He must say something, and what he said would decide her future. It was an unfair burden to lay upon this awkward man, but there it was. Colin sat too, then turned slightly towards Grace. The thing is, she manipulated you. That's what she does. It says so in the folder. She puts all her energy and intelligence into doing it, so she's really good at it. And the reason it worked on you, and will work on other people, I suppose, is that she told you the truth. I don't know what she said to you to make you feel good, but it made you feel good because it was true. She didn't trick you with lies, but with the truth. They sat still. Except you're not ugly, Grace. That wasn't true. They sat for a little longer. Then Colin drove her home.